last few years, the world has gone from one earth-shaking crisis to another. While some say that we are on the threshold of a brave new world order, others warn that humanity now totters on the brink of unprecedented disaster and chaos. Reading the news nowadays is not the most cheerful way to start the day. Day by day, the world's problems grow more desperate and insurmountable. The question which plagues every thinking person is, what lies ahead? But has any mortal man ever been able to transcend the bounds of time and peer into the future? Throughout history, there have been many who have claimed such powers, and some, like Nostradamus, the Fatima children, Edgar Cayce, and Jean Dixon, are widely accepted as having predicted various future events. And the world stage is now set for the fulfillment of one awesome vision which many of these seers had in common. An event so cataclysmic that it will change the world as we now know it forever. The final apocalypse, Armageddon. But if you really want to know the future, exactly what's going to happen, why, and even when, then you must turn to the thousands of prophecies recorded in this book, the Bible. History has proven the extraordinary, unerring accuracy of Bible prophecy. And therefore, there can be no doubt that its hundreds of prophecies about the last days of our planet Earth will also be fulfilled just as surely as the ones that have already been fulfilled in the past. The only question is, when? Sometime in the far future that we don't need to worry about now? Or are we in fact now standing on the threshold of these final, great and climactic events of which all the Bible prophets, including Jesus, spoke? 2,000 years ago, Jesus' disciples sought answers to this same question. They asked him, "Master, tell us, when shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" Let's take a look at some of the signs of the end that Jesus himself warned us to be on the lookout for. Signs that he said would come to pass just before his second coming and the end of the world as we now know it.
And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom.
No period has witnessed the escalation of wars as has the 20th century. The Red Cross has estimated that over 100 million people have been killed in wars since the 20th century began. Up until 1914, war had never been universal, but in both World War I and II, total war was waged. Since World War II, the war that was supposed to make the world safe for democracy, there have been numerous major wars and hundreds of rebellions and revolutions. The death toll in conflict since the end of World War II has now topped 23 million. November 89. The opening of the Berlin Wall symbolizes the end of the Cold War between the superpowers. But instead of the expected peace, more wars and rumors of wars raged around our planet. In 1993, a record 29 major wars were fought. Nation rising against nation and kingdom against kingdom could more accurately be translated as ethnic group rising against ethnic group, a prophecy dreadfully fulfilled in former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, and other trouble spots around the world. Not only are wars and rumors of wars on the increase, but also the horrors that wars unleash. We have become numb to news of atrocities and tortures, mass rape and murder, which show what horrible savagery modern man is still capable of when he is unrestrained by God.
For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines.
Former U.S. President General Dwight D. Eisenhower put the true cost of war in simple terms when he said, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired is in a sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed." The Gulf War alone cost the Allies $500 million a day, or about $350,000 a minute. A fighter plane costs around $25 million. A Tomahawk missile, about $1.3 million. An air-to-air missile, $800,000. Tank shells range from $2,000 to $36,000 each. Translated into more everyday expenses, for the price of this one missile, a school full of hungry children could eat lunch every day for 5 years. Throughout the 1990s, more than 100 million children will die from illness and starvation. Those 100 million deaths could be prevented for the price of 10 stealth bombers, or what the world spends on its military in 2 days. The World Health Organization estimates that 1/3 of the world is well-fed, 1/3 is underfed, 1/3 is starving. Since you started watching this program, at least 200 people have died of starvation. Over 4 million will die this year. However, the world can produce enough food to feed its expanding population. While some famines are caused by drought or other so-called natural disasters, these children are more likely to be starving because of man's inhumanity to man. War, embargoes, government corruption, and economic oppression, such as the insurmountable debt many developing countries owe to international creditors who enticed them to take out huge loans and are now holding the debtor nations in economic slavery, extracting exorbitant interest rates that ensure that the poor grow poorer and the rich lenders grow richer. While these children die of hunger, rich Western nations burn millions of tons of food a year to keep prices artificially high. Famines are largely a result of man's corruption and greed and unwillingness to care for others.
And there shall be famines and pestilences.
Pestilences, or plague. Modern science seems to have eliminated the fear of plague, but today we are on the verge of a deadly scourge that could kill more people than have ever been killed in all of the pestilences yet known to man. It is the plague of AIDS. The HIV virus, which causes AIDS, has currently infected at least 13 to 14 million people around the globe. In 1993, AIDS became the leading cause of death of U.S. males between the ages of 20 and 45. Harvard University scientists estimate that by the year 2000, over 24 million people worldwide will have full-blown AIDS, and an additional 100 million people will be infected with the HIV virus. However, AIDS is not the only modern plague to afflict mankind. Virtually unheard of among our ancestors, over 100 different kinds of cancer now kill over 5 million people every year. The depletion of the ozone layer, which blocks much of the sun's ultraviolet radiation, is thought to be responsible for a dramatic rise in melanoma, a deadly skin cancer. The world recession, resulting in poverty and homelessness, has devastated the healthcare systems of many countries, and diseases once thought banished by modern science have made an alarming comeback. Epidemics of typhoid, diphtheria, and even the Black Death have afflicted areas of India and the former Soviet Union. Deadly new strains of malaria, tuberculosis, and cholera are becoming resistant to all known antibiotics and are killing millions of people. Even the common bacteria that causes pneumonia, children's ear infections, and many other everyday diseases are evolving into forms untreatable by all known medicines, threatening a chilling post-antibiotic era where even the simplest infections could quickly escalate into fatal diseases. Jesus said that there would be an abundance of pestilences or diseases marking the time of his return. Epidemics like AIDS will become widespread as we enter the final era of mankind upon this planet.
There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places.
March the 27th, 1964. Alaska is devastated by a massive earthquake measuring 8.4 on the Richter scale.
AL7, DGA, calling any station. It's an emergency, any station on this frequency.
Amazingly, in the 30 years since the Great Alaska Quake, there have been as many major earthquakes as in the entire previous 2,000 years of world history. The World Almanac tells us that there were only 21 earthquakes of major strength between the years 1000 and 1800. But between 1800 and 1900, there were 18 major earthquakes. In the next 50 years, between 1900 and 1950, there were 33 major quakes. And between 1950 and 1991, there were 93 major earthquakes, almost tripling the number of the previous half-century and claiming the lives of 1.3 million people around the world. This dramatic increase of severe quakes has led many scientists to predict that we are entering a new period of great seismic disturbances. The Bible also clearly predicts that the last days will be a time of great seismic activity, with the earth wheeling to and fro like a drunken man, and the towers and the cities of the nations falling. January the 17th, 1994, an earthquake measuring 6.6 on the Richter scale causes $30 billion worth of damage in Los Angeles. Seismologists predict that California's imminent big one could be 50 times more powerful. January the 17th, 1995, over 5,000 people are killed and 26,000 injured in the Great Hanshin quake in Japan. The port city of Kobe is devastated, its infrastructure destroyed, and over 300,000 people made homeless. Japanese scientists at the Earthquake Center in Tsukuba predict a much stronger quake measuring over 8 on the Richter scale could hit the Tokyo area in the very near future, when either the California or the Tokyo quakes inevitably occur. The death toll, the devastation, as well as the impact on the world economy will be unimaginable. Imagine an ancient prophet seeing a vision of our modern superhighways with hundreds of cars speeding along with their headlights blazing at night. How would he describe it? Now remember, he'd never seen or even imagined anything like an automobile before. Well, 2,600 years ago, the prophet Nahum foresaw that in the last days before Jesus returns,
the chariots shall rage in the streets. They shall jostle one against another in the broad ways. They shall seem like torches. They shall run like the lightnings.
automobiles racing along in the night must have looked like lightning to him. And they certainly do jostle one another in the broad ways. In an average year in the US alone, there are 19.5 million crashes in which 4 million are injured and 45,000 killed. Nahum's prophecy brings to mind another important prediction regarding conditions in the last days, given in 534 BC to the prophet Daniel.
Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased.
God was telling his prophet, Daniel, I'm giving this vision of the last days to you, but it's not for you. It's not for your time. It's for the end time, when
many shall run to and fro.
Are many people running to and fro today? It's incredible when you think that people's primary means of travel hadn't changed for thousands of years until just a little over a century ago. In 1789, it took George Washington 8 days to travel 200 miles to his inauguration in New York City. The fact that it took 8 days is not significant. What is amazing is that Julius Caesar could have traveled just as rapidly. No real progress had been made in transportation over thousands of years. But in a very short period of time, look how mankind has advanced. Now man not only drives at enormous speeds, but a jet can fly around the world in 24 hours and a spacecraft in 80 minutes. People travel today more than they ever traveled before. International tourism is a huge multi-billion-dollar business involving over 200 million people traveling outside their own countries every year throughout the world. Spending on tourism worldwide totaled more than $3 trillion in 1992 alone, and tourist traffic is expected to double over the next 10 years.
Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased.
Knowledge has certainly increased within this generation almost beyond belief. In fact, research studies have shown that the total store of human knowledge is now doubling every 8 years. 80% of all the scientists who have ever lived are alive today. Every minute they add 2,000 pages to man's scientific knowledge, and the scientific material they produce every 24 hours would take one person 5 years to read. About 500,000 new books are published every year. In 1970, when Apollo 13 was lost in space, computers worked out in 90 minutes a way to bring it back. It would have taken a scientist working with a pencil and paper over 1,000,000 years to figure out how to do the same feat. But even since 1970, computer technology has developed so fast that if the auto industry had developed at the same rate, you would today be able to buy a Rolls-Royce for $3, and you could fit 8 of them on the head of a pin. The most basic building block of computer technology, the transistor, was invented at Bell Labs in 1948. In 1994, a computer chip could hold 3.1 million transistors, more than twice as many as the previous year's model. By the end of the decade, a chip will contain more than 1 billion transistors. Machines today have become so complicated, only the most highly trained technicians can even understand them. But have all these amazing scientific discoveries and technological breakthroughs made mankind any happier or more civilized? It seems like the more gadgets and luxuries with which man tries to find happiness and satisfaction, the more discontented and miserable he becomes. In our day and age, knowledge has certainly increased. But although the so-called developed countries, such as the US, claim to have the most advanced and expensive educational systems that the world has ever known, yet they've been turning out the most confused, ignorant, and violent children that they've ever produced. Also in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 37, Jesus prophesied that as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days just before he returns. Well, how were things in the days of Noah?
And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence.
In the US, a teenager shoots his father because he wants to enjoy watching someone bleed to death. In Britain, 2 10-year-old boys kidnap and brutally murder a toddler. In today's world, such horror is becoming commonplace. It is hard to imagine that even the days of Noah were as violence-filled as those in which we are now living. Vietnam. Americans mourn the death of 58,000 of their young men in 8.5 years of fighting. But the casualty rate on U.S. city streets is now 4 times as high. The FBI reports that 24,530 people were murdered in the U.S. in 1994 alone. The U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics estimates that a whopping 1.1 million violent crimes were committed with guns in 1992. Many of the victims are teenagers, killed by other teenagers who seem to have no concept of the value of life. Society wrings its hands and agonizes. Why? Behavioral scientists have concluded that one of the main culprits is this. By the time the average American child is 15 years old, he will have witnessed the violent destruction of more than 35,000 human beings on television, as well as 200,000 other brutal acts of violence. Violence is glorified in America, where the national icons from Sylvester Stallone to Arnold Schwarzenegger tend to be men who excel at violence. Movies such as the Rambo and Terminator series, which have grossed hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide, illustrate how voracious the appetite for violence is in today's world. Children's cartoons today also contain all kinds of sickening violence. Eclipsing the Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles and The Simpsons, MTV's Beavis and Butthead has become a children's favorite. A far cry from the Disney cartoons of a generation ago, Beavis and Butthead routinely torture animals, set fire to furniture, and engage in all kinds of abhorrent juvenile behavior. Then there's horror movies. Many preteens today watch this type of movie at gross-out parties with their friends. Video shops report that horror movies are especially popular among 11 to 15-year-olds. And then there's rock music videos, many of which romanticize violence, sexual assaults, and murder. Between the 7th and 12th grades, the average American teenager will listen to and watch 11,000 hours of rock music, more than twice the time they will spend in class. The fruit of all this is that the rock and roll era has seen violent crime increase among young people by over 10,000%. Today, in the US alone, a violent crime is committed every 25 seconds. Every 9 seconds, a home is burglarized. A woman is raped every 6 minutes. Every 25 minutes, someone is murdered. The only comfort in this terrible tide of rising violence is that according to Bible prophecy, it is yet another unquestionable sign that points to the second coming of Jesus Christ, when all senseless violence and cruelty will be stopped and war itself will be abolished.
And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall grow cold.
With today's totally selfish and self-indulgent me generation, this prophecy by Jesus about the end times certainly is being fulfilled. Iniquity abounds more than it ever has in world history, and no one can deny that the love between so many people has certainly grown cold. In the USA, 50% of all marriages end up in divorce, and 1/4 of all children born in the USA do not have married parents. Sodom and Gomorrah. When the movie The Bible was released, people may have been shocked at the portrayal of the wickedness of the men of Sodom and Gomorrah who tried to sexually molest the angelic messengers of God as they came to warn Lot to flee the city before its impending destruction.
Bring them out unto us. Bring them out, that we may know them.
As it was in the days of Lot, the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed.
Here Jesus is giving another clue regarding world conditions and trends immediately before his return. An increase in sodomy or male homosexuality. Surely today's standards of morality are as it was in the days of Lot, and the same as those that prevailed in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Now the Spirit expressly says that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils.
U.S. public schools departed from the faith when in 1963 the Bible and prayer were officially banned. Now thousands of these same schools are teaching credited courses in the doctrines of devils, witchcraft. It is estimated that there are over 200,000 practicing witches in the United States, and there are literally millions of Americans who dabble in some form of the occult, psychic phenomena, spiritism, demonology, and black magic. Statistics show that occult book sales have doubled in the past 4 years. Witchcraft today is no longer the stuff of small underground cults. Many rock videos are an open worship of Satan and hell that comes complete with the symbols, liturgies, and rituals of witchcraft. And millions of young people have been caught in its evil sway. These sounds of horror and torment are literally driving young people insane and seducing them into a life of drugs, suicide, perversion, and hell. Gradually, the world has been taken captive by seducing spirits. Today's music videos show that even the most shameless acts of blasphemy and desecration are becoming socially acceptable. In the book of Revelation, the Apostle John foresaw that in the last days, the world would turn away from God in order to worship and follow Satan. Such a prophecy would have seemed unbelievable to previous generations, but not so in our day. Hardcore Satanism has been called the fastest-growing subculture among America's teens, and the revival of witchcraft and the occult is one of the world's fastest-growing religions. After telling his disciples that some of these signs that you've just seen, wars, famines, plagues, and earthquakes, were just the beginning of sorrows, Jesus went on to foretell a sign that would signify when the actual time of the end had arrived.
And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come.
The Christian Almanac for 1990 reports that the gospel has now been preached to over 4 billion people, and Christian churches now exist in all 251 countries of the world. Every year, about 4 billion gospel tracts are distributed around the globe and over 120 million Bibles. The entire Bible, or portions of it, have now been translated into some 2,062 languages and is available to around 98% of the world's population. The gospel is also preached from over 2,000 Christian radio and television stations, and religious shows can be seen on many more thousands of secular stations. Never in the entire course of history has the gospel been preached in all the world to all nations as it is right now. Every nation on the face of the earth today has heard the gospel as Jesus prophesied they would before the end comes. So, if Jesus was right and the Bible is true, we are now living in the time of the end. In the beginning of Matthew chapter 16, Jesus' religious enemies challenged him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, "When it is evening, ye say, it'll be fair weather tomorrow, for the sky is red. And in the morning ye say, it'll be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. Ye hypocrites, ye can discern the face of the sky, but can ye not discern the signs of the times?" Modern technology has vastly improved our ability to forecast the weather. But are we any less blind to the ominous signs of the times in which we are now living?
So likewise ye, when ye see these things come to pass, know ye that the kingdom of God is nigh at hand. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled.
Our generation, the generation in which these signs of the end are coming into fruition, will not pass till all be fulfilled. So what is yet to come to pass? Well, one of the final signs of the very end is the rise of a one-world government headed by a superhuman dictator, the Antichrist. The Antichrist, also described in the Bible as the son of perdition and the beast. Like Hitler, who was one of history's Antichrist archetypes, he will have great charisma and speaking ability, a mouth speaking great things. The Antichrist will rise to power on a wave of world euphoria as he temporarily saves the world from its desperate economic, military, and political problems with a brilliant 7-year plan for world peace, economic stability, and religious freedom. The Antichrist could well rise out of the current chaos in the former Soviet Union. The prophet Ezekiel names him as the ruler of Magog, a name that biblical scholars agree denotes a country or region of peoples to the north of Israel. Many have interpreted this to mean modern-day Russia. His power base will include the leading nations of Europe, whose leaders, the Bible says, will give their power and strength unto the beast. The Bible even gives some clues about his personal characteristics. The prophet Daniel wrote that the Antichrist does not regard the desire of women. This could imply that he is either celibate or a homosexual. Daniel also tells us that he will have a fierce countenance or stern look and will be more stout than his fellows, more proud and boastful. The 7-year peace pact or covenant that is engineered by the Antichrist is spoken of a number of times in the Bible and may even already have been signed in secret. The historic peace agreement signed between Israel and the PLO at the White House on September the 13th, 1993, vividly illustrates how dramatically events in the Middle East are presently moving in this direction. Under the final terms of the covenant, Jerusalem will likely be declared an international city to which Judaism, Islam, and Christianity will have equal rights. Scripture indicates that the Jews will be permitted to rebuild their temple on Mount Moriah, where they revived their ancient rituals of animal sacrifice. According to prophecy, the Antichrist will not only be a master of political intrigue, but also a military genius. Daniel describes several major wars that he fights during his 7-year reign, apparently against the US and Israel, who will oppose him during the second half of his reign. For a while, most of the world is going to think the Antichrist is wonderful, as he will have seemed to have solved so many of the world's problems. But 3.5 years into his 7-year reign, he will break the covenant and invade Israel from the north. At this time, he makes Jerusalem his world capital and outlaws all religions except for the worship of himself and his image. The Bible says that the Antichrist will sit in the Jewish temple, exalting himself as God and demanding to be worshipped. It is at this time that the Antichrist imposes his infamous 666 one world credit system.
And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And his number is 666.
666, the mark of the beast. Almost everybody has heard something about this prophecy that says that in the last days, no one will be able to buy or sell anything unless they get the devil's mark. Well, today, we're the first generation with the technology available to fulfill such a prophecy of a cashless society. For instance, every item in this supermarket has been barcoded with its own personal identification number. You may have noticed that this barcode, known as the Uniform Product Code System, has 3 unnumbered bars or lines at its beginning, middle, and end, which are slightly longer than its other bars. All these other lines correspond to a different number. Well, pay attention to this particular line. It is designated as corresponding to the number 6. And as you can see, it is exactly the same as the 3 unmarked lines that are also 6s. So every barcoded item is in fact marked with a 666. The 666 barcode system of identification is the basis of other trends and technologies that are rapidly leading us towards the one world credit system described in Revelation chapter 13. At present in this supermarket, there are just 3 ways in which I can pay for this shopping. I can use cash, or I can write a check, or I can pay by credit card. Another system that is being promoted in many countries of the world today is a debit card. Now, when I give my debit card to the cashier, she runs it through an electronic scanner, which is linked to my bank account. Then the money is taken from my bank account and put in the store's account, all in a split second. Debit cards have already been introduced in many parts of the world and are extremely popular with stores, banks, and customers. Then there's the IC card, or the smart card, which actually has a little computer chip embedded in the card. You probably read about these electronic marvels that not only give you access to your bank account, but also contains your passport, medical record, driver's license, photographs, welfare eligibility, and all kinds of other data. These are already being tested in various parts of the world. So as you can see, we are fast on the way to eliminating cash, and there are many compelling reasons why. Cash is the very mother's milk of drug smugglers who often deal in cash a suitcase full at a time. With no cash, the sale of illegal drugs would cease. In fact, to eliminate cash would eliminate almost every kind of criminal activity, from theft to terrorism, and be an instant cure-all for many of the world's most desperate social and economic ills. No wonder governments are pushing towards the cashless society with unrestrained enthusiasm. However, before cash, checks, and credit cards can be phased out completely, thank you, they have to develop an identification system that is absolutely foolproof and will ensure that a person presenting a card for a transaction is actually the owner of that card. Various foolproof ID systems have already been developed, like this fingerprint reader. However, the only problem with these machines is that they are extremely expensive. For a completely cashless society to work, there would have to be one at every little shop and retail outlet where anything is bought and sold. Whereas these identification terminals cost many thousands of dollars each, the little microchip embedded in the plastic smart card costs only a few dollars each. So, what if you took the chip out of the card and placed it under the skin? Once the chip has been implanted, it can be read by an inexpensive scanner, much like the one at your local grocery store. So you now become your own smart card. And the very expensive problem of making sure that the owner of the card is who he says he is has been solved. In the U.S., the Department of Health and Human Services says that full-scale implantation of the new microdot identification project is already underway in Washington, D.C. and several other test cities. These tiny computer chips, no larger than the head of a pin, cost less than 25 cents each and are injected a quarter-inch under the skin. They are activated by a small handheld scanner and provide flawless identification of the person in whom it was implanted. So as we can see, the technology and the public acceptance to make the Mark of the Beast system work is rapidly falling into place. Already we are constantly hearing about the New World Order or global community, and these buzz slogans are slowly sinking in as the world heads towards an international financial and political system, a cashless society controlled by a computer database that covers the entire globe, keeping track of every man, woman, and child, where they cross borders, and when they buy and sell. Exactly like the one predicted in Revelations chapter 13, nearly 2,000 years ago.
If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture, and the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever.
That may seem like pretty stiff punishment for simply accepting a mark that allows you to buy groceries. However, this prophecy indicates that receiving the mark of the beast is not merely an economic decision, but also implies acceptance and worship of the Satan-possessed Antichrist and a pledge of allegiance to his anti-God global regime.
And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed.
This image of the beast, also described in Bible prophecy as the abomination of desolation, is likely to be some kind of incredibly high-tech supercomputer linked to the New World Order's telecommunications network. Scripture says it will speak and somehow cause those who refuse to worship it to be killed. Jesus said that when you see this image standing in the holy place, then shall be great tribulation, such as the world has never known. A good part of the book of Revelation describes in horrific detail the terrible pestilences, plagues, and nightmarish monsters that God lets loose to tribulate the Antichrist forces who are trying to wipe out all who refuse to take the mark of the beast. The Bible spells it out in years, months, and days exactly how long this period of great tribulation will be. 3.5 years, or 42 months, or 1,260 days. So, on the day that the Antichrist breaks the covenant and sets up his image in Jerusalem, the countdown of the exact number of days until the second coming of Jesus Christ will begin.
Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his chosen from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
The world's darkest period of tribulation and horror under the Antichrist will abruptly end with the dawning of the brightest dawn, as Jesus Christ himself returns to gather his children to be with him. Lights, trumpets, thunder, earthquakes, and gigantic meteor showers will all herald this climactic event. God's children who have died throughout the ages will be resurrected in new miraculous bodies and will burst forth from their graves and ascend to meet Jesus in the air. Live Christians will be transformed and will rise from the earth, floating right up through ceilings and buildings and cars and right up into the clouds to meet the Lord. Such is the scenario depicted in the Bible of the second coming of Christ, as he snatches his children out of reach of their evil Antichrist persecutors and whisks them away to the grandest, most glorious, and thrilling victory celebration that's ever been held, the great marriage supper of the Lamb in heaven. Meanwhile, down on earth, the horrible wrath of God is being poured out upon the Antichrist forces left behind. A time so terrible that the Bible says that men will seek death, but be unable to find it. Then, shortly after Jesus' second coming, down from the sky will come the great hosts of heaven, with Jesus in the lead, to destroy the Antichrist and his one-world empire in the awesome Battle of Armageddon. This great slaughter of the Antichrist and his armies will take place in and around the valley of Megiddo, near Haifa in Israel. It will mark the end of man's cruel rule on earth, as Jesus, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and his heavenly forces forcibly take over the world to rule and reign and run it the way it should have been run if man had not disobeyed God and gone his own selfish way. And so begins a period known as the Millennium, 1,000 years of peace and plenty and paradise on earth. Well, to say the least, we're living in very exciting times, and there's soon to be some great global changes made. The curtains have been drawn aside on the last great scene of Earth's drama. The act has begun, and it cannot stop now. Like it or not, each one of our lives are going to be caught up in these great events. The countdown to Armageddon has begun. The interpretation of these Bible prophecies which we have examined are not unique, but are shared by millions of Christians worldwide, both Catholic and Protestant. Many Muslims believe that passages of the Quran and other Islamic writings foretell a number of these same apocalyptic events.